Hello, I'm Simon. Welcome back to my workshop. Now today I'm going to be looking in depth at the adjustments available for this sliding table on my Axminster Craft 216 TS table saw. Axminster recently rebranded this table saw. Their Axminster Craft range is now their Axminster Workshop range, but I believe it's exactly the same table saw that you can still buy. The reason I'm going to be looking at the adjustments is I had a viewer comment that they really struggled to get their table saw set up properly, or the sliding table part of their table saw set up properly, to the extent that they even had Axminster out to try and set it up. Now there are a lot of degrees of freedom and adjustments available on this table saw, and therefore I can understand why it would be quite difficult to set up. I don't know if I'll be more successful than they were, but I do know that I've been very happy with this table saw and the sliding table. So let's see if I can set it up to a reasonable level of accuracy. Let's get tinkering. We'll start by looking at all the possible adjustments, and then we'll work up a strategy for what to adjust first, second, third, fourth and so on. The easiest adjustment to understand is the adjustment of the fence with respect to the sliding table. And that is done with this little bolt here. This is the last thing we're going to adjust. But for now, I'll remove the fence from the sliding table. Looking underneath the sliding table, it rolls on these wheels. The height of these wheels can be adjusted with a little bolt next to each wheel. You need to adjust these so there is no play in the carriage system. But what this also does is adjusts the height in this angle, so it will change total height of the sliding table with respect to the rail itself. I'll now remove the sliding table so that we can see the other adjustments. Here's a close-up of those wheel adjustments. With the sliding table off, let's have a quick look at how to adjust these wheels. To start with, the wheel is held on with this big nut here and washer. Take those off. You can see that it's sitting in a slot. If I unscrew this one, the whole thing comes out of the slot. There's a little grub screw here and a nut here. You adjust whereabouts in the slot this wheel is by adjusting the grub screw and the bolt. So in order to do that, you have to make sure that this big nut is loose, and then you can adjust. You loosen this one off, then adjust this one, tighten it all up, and do that for all four of the wheels. There are a couple more adjustments available to us, but to see those properly, I'm going to need to remove the rail. The rail is held on with these triangular brackets. Now there are two adjustments here. These triangular brackets are held on with these bolts, and these are in a slot, so the triangular bracket can be moved up and down. So you have to loosen these and then adjust this bolt here to adjust the height of the triangular brackets. Also, these bolts have got a little hex head in the end, and they allow you to screw them in and out of the frame, adjusting the angle of this bracket. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that the carriage moves smoothly up and down the rail. Now I've checked these and I can see that this wheel here is not quite tight. So I'm going to loosen this. I'm going to put my Allen key in here and I'm going to just pinch it up. I'm going to have to loosen it there, and I'll pinch it up, and you can see that it's moving the wheel towards the rail until I've got a nice, I think that's okay. I'm just going to loosen that a little bit more, just tighten it up so I've got a nice smooth movement. Now if I move any of the wheels, none of them are slipping. They all move nicely. Now I can tighten this back up. That's so tight I can't move it now, so I've obviously done something wrong. Okay, the strategy I found worked best for adjusting these wheels is to loosen off completely this nut, adjust the grub screw and this bolt until you had enough pressure to be able to move these wheels so they don't slip and that the carriage moves. Then just to pinch up this nut. If you tighten this nut too much, it seems to change the geometry and it'll lock in place. So I now have a smooth running table. So I've moved the table all the way back and I'm placing my ruler above this joint. Just zoom in. And you can see that the table is too high. So I'm going to loosen these bolts and then using the height adjuster I'm going to adjust the height so that the table here is the same height as the bed. This is the view from under the table. I'm just going to move the table out of the way temporarily so I can just loosen this bolt here and the other bolt that you can't see that hold this triangular bracket onto the frame of the cabinet saw. Now I just want to loosen these a little bit. Some of it has to be done a little bit by touch. They're only finger tight now. So I've loosened this locking nut and there's a hex head inside this thread you can turn to lower the bed, and then you just give the bed a bit of a wiggle so that it lowers. You can see I've adjusted a little bit too low now because the ruler is hitting the bed. So I'll now adjust it with the ruler there until I get it perfect. That to me is perfect. Now you can see that it's going up, it's not at the right angle, but at the moment all I'm worried about is getting this surface level with this surface. And I think we're about there. I now need to tighten this without moving the height adjuster. So I'm putting the Allen key back in and that'll just allow me to hold it in place while I lock this off. I now need to move the sliding table over so that it's above this bracket. And again, I'll test the height. And again, you can see it's just a little too high at the moment. So I need to undo that locking nut. So the procedure here is the same. I'm going to undo the locking nut. That's loose. I'm going to lower the bed slightly. Give it a bit of a wiggle so that it goes down and then retest. So now I'm adjusting it, it's a little bit too low. I'm just adjusting it until it's perfect. So just as before, I'm going to put the Allen key in so that it doesn't move the thread and then just lock it off with the locking nut. The final thing we need to tackle is getting the angle of the sliding table aligned with the bed. You can see here that the sliding table is not quite angled correctly. To adjust that, we need to adjust the bolts that hold the triangular brackets to the actual saw. Okay, let's first get orientated with this weird camera angle. So this is the back of the table saw. This is the extension bed of the table saw. This is the rail that the sliding table slides on, and this is the triangular bracket that holds the rail to the table saw. Now these bolts here and here change the angle of the rail. We know that our sliding table isn't sitting flush like this, but it's sitting a little bit like this. So we need to reorientate this rail so that it moves that way by moving this piece here in towards body of the cabinet saw. I think I may have overcooked it a little. There's definitely a gap there at the moment. Just slowly bring it up, and I think that is perfect. I'm now going to move the sliding table back so it's in the same position as the other triangular bracket, and I'll do the same adjustment. Now, there's a slight issue here because now this bed is slightly lower than the table, and this is because we're using the same adjustments on a lot of things, so things get slightly out. So we've now got to go and raise the height of this bed slightly. So I've tweaked the height of the bed using the method I showed you earlier, and I think this still needs a slight adjustment. These are quite small movements, maybe 1/16 of a turn I'm doing. That looks pretty good to me. Okay, so let's just recap where we are so far. I've raised this sliding table so that it's flush here and here with the bed. I've then adjusted this angle of the bed so that this is flat all the way across here and this doesn't tilt down. What I've noticed is here it's slightly out. So at the back of the bed there's a slight catch, whereas at the front of the bed there isn't. So this orientation here needs to change. I need to move it up at this end slightly. And the only way to do that is to again adjust the bolt on the carriage and just shift the back up slightly. We're talking maybe a 32, maybe a 1/16 of a turn on those bolts, just to raise this bit up slightly. So that's the next bit that I'm going to do. Now this is slightly counterintuitive. To raise this side up, I need to tighten these bolts here so they push down on this, which will then push that up. So I need to loosen the grub screws slightly. I reckon about 1/8 of a turn is all that's needed. Now I need to loosen these off. And then tighten these. Just that same 1/4 of a turn or 1/8 of a turn. So what I tend to do is try and move these wheels, and if they slip on the rail, then it's not, it needs readjusting. Otherwise you have play on the rail, and we don't want that. Now just one thing to bear in mind when you're adjusting these is you need to adjust them by exactly the same amount, otherwise you'll change the tilt of the table. We don't want to do that. We want to just raise it, keeping the orientation the same, because we've already adjusted the tilt. So always adjust these by exactly the same amount if you want to change the height. So we now need to make sure that this bed is running parallel to the slots in the main bed. And to test that, there's a number of ways you can do it. The simplest way is just to clamp your steel rule so it's completely flush with the edge of the slot here, and move it up to the other end, and it should still be completely flush. And I can feel that mine is out. It's out by, I don't know, 1/4 of a millimetre, something like that. So to adjust that, we have to adjust where this rail is. We need to bring this rail out slightly by 1/4 of a millimetre. Now, the only mechanism we've got of doing that is to adjust the 2 bolts that hold this triangular bracket onto the main machine, but we need to adjust them by exactly the same amount. If we adjust them by different amounts, then we'll start changing the tilt of the rail, which we don't want to do. We just want to bring it out by 1/4 of a millimetre. So what I need to do is loosen off these nuts. I then need to move this out by about 1/4 of a turn. I then need to tighten this nut off again. And I need to do the same at the bottom, which is really difficult to video, so I'm not going to video that bit. And it would appear I've moved that the wrong way, so I'm now going to adjust it in the other direction. The sliding table is now completely parallel with the mitre slots on the saw, varying by no more than 0.2 0.02 millimeters. Now we're on the final adjustment, which is adjusting the Mitre Fence so that it's square with the blade. Now, to do that, you have to adjust this bolt. So I'm first going to loosen the locking nut. Now I can turn this in and out to adjust whereabouts this stop finishes. But to do that, I have to put the square against the fence and then carefully look. So I need to come this way towards me a little bit. Come about that much. Leave that there and just move that back up. And I'm looking down the square, just seeing if there's any gaps. And that looks about right to me. With that now correct, I can tighten this locking nut. So I'm going to put this on there so it doesn't move. And then just tighten this up. Right, so I like to have this stop itself quite tight. Then there's no jiggle backwards and forwards that could alter things. So this is the fourth angle, so it will be out by 4 times whatever the error in the square is. So I've got 89.8 degrees, so that's 0.2 degrees out, but that was times 4, so it's going to be 0.05 degrees error. And let's just see what that actually means in reality. So back to our maths classes, we've got a right angle triangle. And this is A, this is the opposite, and that's the adjacent. We can then use some trigonometry. Tan A equals the opposite over the adjacent. Now, the adjacent here is the capacity of my saw, which is 800 millimeters. We know the angle A is 0.05 degrees, so we've got tan 0.05 equals the opposite over the adjacent, which is 800. Then division goes over and does multiplication. 800 times the tan of 0.05 equals, let me just get my calculator, 0.05 tan times 800 millimeters equals 0.7 of a millimeter. So over the maximum capacity that I can cut on this saw of 800 millimeters, I would be out at the far end by 0.7 millimeters. Whilst that may not be acceptable to some people, I'm perfectly happy with that. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this investigation into the adjustments available on the sliding table of this table saw. If you have, then please leave a thumbs up, and if you'd like to see more videos like this, then please remember to subscribe. It makes a massive difference. Thanks for watching.